All right. Good morning, everybody. We've got 11 a.m. and I know Wayne has got a full schedule of slides to go through in this presentation. So we're going to start as promptly as possible. I just wanted to take a moment and welcome everybody to today's HR webinar. This is the fifth installment of our webinar series, and today's topic is on employee and labor relations. So as we've done with all of the past sessions, we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So everybody does have the ability to mute yourselves and unmute yourselves to ask questions or fire away at any time. You could also put questions at the chat if you don't feel like speaking up. But again, we do welcome responses and some dialogue. So just take yourself off of mute and feel free to fire away. With that being said, I will turn things over to Wayne Smith. And again, thanks everybody for joining.
Good morning, everyone. Jeff, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
All right, very good. So just a couple of housekeeping items real quick. We will try to wrap up on time at 12 o'clock. For those of you that have been in these sessions before, you know we usually cover a lot of content, and the last 5 minutes is usually a little compressed. But we will try to get through it in a timely manner to be respectful of your time. We will stay on after 12 o'clock. If anybody has questions or comments or wants to discuss anything about the presentation or anything else manufacturing related, so feel free to hang around after the presentation. I will try to manage the noise level as much as I can on my side of the presentation. I will warn you that I live next to a volunteer fire department, and they are shooting a movie right outside my office window today. So if things do get noisy, I will just mute myself and may step away for a couple minutes. Like Jeff said, everybody feel free to unmute themselves, ask questions, jump in wherever you want. This is meant to be a conversation more than a presentation. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Any questions before we get started? All right, so today we're going to talk about employee and labor relations. There is going to be a lot of union versus non-union material in this. So if you are a union shop, hopefully you find some value. If you're a non-union shop, I hope there's as much value for this presentation as there is for the other group. The union relationship, the non-union relationship as it applies to employee labor relations, as we've spoken before, requires a strategy. And that's basically what this series is about, is having a strategy and having a plan. So let's jump into the content real quick. First up, Jeff has already taken care of the introductions. I will introduce myself. I don't think there are any new people on the call, but for anybody that watches this at a later time, I am Wayne Smith. I am a principal consultant at AMT. I have more than 30 years of experience in manufacturing. The vast majority of that time has been spent in management and supervisory roles, predominantly HR, safety, finance, and IT. But HR is probably weighted the heaviest of all my time in manufacturing. Let's talk real quick about the HR surveys. For those of you that have received the survey, please finish the survey. As soon as you do, I will reach out to you to schedule your complimentary HR assessment. I know there's some of you in the meeting right now that are waiting for some additional personnel to join. Please let us know when that happens so we can get that scheduled for you. Then we're going to talk about union-free strategies. We're going to talk about employee involvement in strategies. We're going to talk about taking the temperature of your workforce, a little bit about handbooks and policies, post-employment agreements, conflict resolution, and then finally, unionization. So let's start with by talking about employee relation strategies. This is a little bit of a checklist. This presentation will be created like a checklist that hopefully, if you're so motivated, you could even print it out and use it as a checklist to go through when you're evaluating or creating your HR strategy. So the first step is having a vision describing the type of workplace culture to create. I know that some of us inherit certain cultures. I don't know if any of us have a culture that we're 100% completely happy with. You can create a plan for that. You can look at white papers and businesses around the country and businesses around the world that that have models that can be emulated. And there are also, on the flip side of that, there are models that you don't want to emulate. So that's another part of the value of benchmarking. When creating the employee relations strategy, make sure it's aligned with your organizational strategy. It's a tough sell for you and your management team and your labor force if your employee relations strategy is running counter to your organizational strategy, whether that be expansion or a quality focus or a customer focus or whatever your strategy is focused on. Take the time to align your employee relations strategy with that. Implement a communication plan. For those of you that are returning from previous webinars, you know I've spent a lot of time talking about communication plans. You can't underestimate or undervalue a good communication plan. It takes a lot of the guesswork out. We all know that workforces, when they don't have the facts, they will fill the gaps. And sometimes it's not the most factual exercise. Joint management employee task force to define opportunities to improve communication between leadership and employees. This is super important. When you have your team meetings, when you have your start of shift meetings, any of your meetings, anytime you have FaceTime, try to maximize that time. Try to get the most value out of that time. There is a discipline out there that I've used in the past, world-class organizational management, some people call it WCOM, that is really focused on this practice about maximizing and getting the most out of all of your FaceTime, all of your meeting time, and all the times that you cross path between leadership and employees. Any questions about that slide? So let's jump into the union-free workplace strategies. Before we do, I'd like to kind of get a feel for the room. Who in the group is union-free? If you would, by a show of hands or just responding or responding in the chat.
Yeah, Sam Screen is union-free.
Raymond Hadley is union-free.
Mercury is union-free.
All right, so that's 3 out of 3 so far. Does anybody have union? It looks like Amphenol is union-free. All right, that's not what I expected to see, but that's let's just say good for you. So that doesn't happen by accident. So if there's anybody in the meeting that does have a union, and it's not the greatest relationship in the world, and I want to go on record saying unions are not inherently bad. They can be a lot of work, but they can provide some advantages that a non-union environment can provide, depending on what your business model is like. But if you're union free, there's probably a reason for that. You're probably doing some things or have an environment or have a product or an approach to your strategy that is conducive to that. So congratulations to those of you that are union free. You probably have some of these already in place, but we'll visit them anyway. For anyone that has a union and is looking to maybe create a strategy that is a union-free strategy, maybe decertification is on your horizon, and that does happen. So a good idea for maintaining union-free workplace is a clearly stated position regarding unionization. that may be something that you put in your employee handbook, or make sure that you cover that during onboarding or orientation. Make sure the groups in your organization that would be eligible to become union members, make sure they understand what a union card signifies. If you wake up some morning and you come to work and there's a group of people standing at the entrance of your business handing out union cards, do you have a plan for that? Do your employees know what that means? For those of you that are on the call that are union free, has anybody ever experienced organization at any level? Have you ever had to deal with a union showing up and pushing a union drive? Someone said at one of their previous jobs, yes. So when that happened, did you have a notice? Did you see it coming, or was it something that that kind of blindsided you? Okay, so the response is both. So it can happen that way. Sometimes you can get the temperature from your group that says that there's something going on. You may not see it right away. Let me see if I can get to the chat. Make sure the employees know how elections work. They need to understand that they may not take it seriously when there's a vote, and they need to understand what a vote means, and the way that the ratification takes place. Sometimes it doesn't have to be 100% of the workforce. Sometimes it can be a majority. One thing to focus on is fair and consistent treatment of employees. That is probably one of the biggest keys in staying union free. Access to career opportunities and a balance of promotion decisions, which means a balance between skills and seniority. Most of you know that in a union environment, it is predominantly based on seniority. That's kind of one of the perks that a union environment will offer a union member, is the opportunity to advance or opportunities for unique things in their tenure based on their seniority date. Communication programs we've already talked about, and feedback mechanisms work really well in maintaining a union-free workplace. Your department and communication meetings, make sure that those are in place where people feel like they have a voice. Employee participation programs are really important for maintaining a union-free workplace. And I did put this in red because I did want to make sure that there was a caveat to this point, that when you create employee participation programs, please make sure that you're not having employees representing other employees, that people in this group or this committee is not speaking for someone else, and they are not making recommendations to management, because at that point you may have already crossed the line into some kind of representation. Management and supervisor training is super important when it comes to maintaining a union-free workplace. One of the characteristics that is really common with workforces that you see union drives taking place is a strained relationship between labor and management, specifically at the supervisor level. And as we've talked about before, supervisors are where the rubber meets the road. That's where they're going to be the face of the organization for most of your labor groups. So make sure that you're investing plenty of time in your supervisors and your managers to make sure that they are leading by example. Performance appraisals are very important. This is something that's probably not as evident in unionized environments because in a union environment, wages are usually set. There's usually no pay for performance or anything like that. So making sure that people have the ability to understand their performance and where it's going. All right, give me just a second here. Compensation and benefits. lagging in compensation and benefits is probably where most of the fires are going to start. If you see unionization, it doesn't always start there, but it's probably going to be the most talked about. So this is something when you do your annual reviews, you do your annual strategy, know where you are in your region when it comes to a compensation and benefits perspective. And then lastly, understand the environment and understand the climate. This is a very broad statement, and I'm trying to be apolitical, but certain types of government are more sympathetic and more fostering to unionization. Right now in Washington, the group that's in power at this time is more pro-union. So that's something that you need to be aware of. If you read the news in New York, there's been quite a bit of union activity around the Amazon group. This wasn't on their radar a couple years ago, and now it is. I think I even saw a story this week around some of the White House staff is unionizing. So be aware of the climate that's around you. And if you're union free and you want to remain that way, be proactive, have a strategy. For those of you that have never had to deal with the organization effort, be ready for it in case it does pop up, because it can be one of those things that takes you by surprise. And when it happens, it's I don't want to say it's too late, but you're at a disadvantage. You're already reacting if you don't have a plan in place. Any questions around union-free workplace strategies? And everybody has access to their mute button. You can take yourself off mute if you would like to. Felicity, do you have, can you unmute and give us a kind of a synopsis of the situation that you had around unionization? I believe it was you that was responding in the chat.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So kind of give us a 2-minute on your experience, what happened and how it happened and what the result was.
This was when I was working in HR for a large fast food organization, and nothing came of it. But there was walkouts during lunch shift at one of the restaurants, and then union people had come in, but majority of the employees did not want it. So it kind of ended there, but it was a little bit nerve-wracking.
And that's one of the great points to understand, is that when this happens, there's not a lot of time to do anything else. Your management team is pretty much in full firefighting mode. How long did the whole process take once it started and until your workforce voted down the opportunity?
I'm thinking, because this was several years ago now. It probably took a good couple weeks, I would say.
Yeah.
For everything.
So for a couple weeks, you probably weren't doing a lot of other things other than.
No, yeah.
Exactly. And that's pretty typical. I appreciate you giving us the feedback, Felicity, because I've been in the same situation. You come in the office in the morning and there's a group of people clustered around the entrance. And at that point you say, well, what the hell's going on? And you walk in the building and there's union cards all over the place. And at that point you've got 20 messages on your phone from corporate saying, what's going on? What's your plan? What are you going to do? What brought this on? Not an enviable spot to be in.
Right.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else have any experience around this? All right, so let's move on to the next slide here. Let's talk about employee involvement strategies. So one of the ways to remain union free is to involve employees, make them feel like they have a voice. One of the ways you can do that is around job design, variety, the significance. People want to feel like they're making an impact, and that the work they're doing is important. Autonomy. You know, nobody likes to be micromanaged. What opportunities do you have to build autonomy into your job descriptions? And feedback. Once again, everybody wants to have a voice, and we'll talk about taking the temperature and how you do that in some later slides. Cross-training is another really valuable way to involve employees. If you have a smaller location, like some of you do, and you have a fairly flat org chart, then look at opportunities to do some cross-functional training across departments. Rotation is a great way to do that. Of course, job enlargement for those people that are handling their current job load. You know, you could add more of the same, or you can expand that through job enrichment and kind of increase the level of difficulty and what someone's doing. It's really motivational for someone to get out of their norm. Flexibility is important. Some of the new things that people are trying with the current crunch in the labor markets, phased retirement. You know, I would imagine some of you have people out there that have retired recently, that in a crunch, if you reached out to them, they would be willing to come back on a part-time basis. Job sharing and telecommuting, for those of us that have lived through the two plus years of COVID now, you know, we are telecommuting more than we ever have. And, you know, 5 years ago, we would have never thought it was possible. So examine more possibilities around that if it has value to you. And job sharing, this is something that's becoming very, it's becoming very popular. A lot of people aren't ready to come back to the workforce post-COVID full time for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons can be varied. You know, around childcare, daycare has played a big part of that. So there are opportunities for job sharing. If you have an administrative job or a job in your facility that you're looking at, maybe consider having someone do it in the morning and have someone do it in the afternoon, and have two people share that job and do it part-time. Gives you some flexibility, and it expands your ability to compete. And then teams, committees, project teams, and task forces are a great way to get people involved. Most of you probably have safety committees. That's a great place for people to develop cross-functional skills. Project teams, I know that takes a lot more time away from normal jobs, but I will tell you, in my experience, having people from across the organization participating in project teams has a lot of value. Project teams are made up of people from just one function, can be a little short-sighted. And then task forces are those things that come up that are usually short-lived. Safety investigations if you have an accident. This is a great way to get people involved also and get a lot of feedback. And like I said earlier, don't miss on an opportunity to compete just because you think you can't do some of these things. Because I will tell you, working with a lot of different organizations as we do at AMT, your competitors are doing this. Manufacturers in the Southern Tier are doing a lot of these things. They're looking at phased retirement. They're looking at job sharing and part-time positions and telecommuting. And you owe it to yourself to at least look at it, because this is the new playing field. Any questions about any of this? Okay, so we're going to move on to measuring employee attitudes. For most of you, this is review. We've talked about this before. We talked about this when we did employee engagement and retention, but I want to touch on it again because it is a big part of employee and labor relations. Doing surveys has a lot of value, and there are those of you on this call that I know that do this, and you do it very well. Another option is focus groups. You can create small groups of people and give them opportunities to give you feedback on specific topics. That this has a lot of value. Skip level meetings are something also to consider. Having immediate supervisors or direct managers in a meeting can have a cooling effect. And I know all of us in management hope this is not true, that if we're in the room, people aren't claiming up for because we're there, but it happens. It really does. So if you're in HR and you want to venture in a new way to get feedback, check out skip level meetings where maybe you talk to your production team and you don't have the supervisor there. And that's the definition of a skip level. Maybe you talk to some of your support teams without a manager there. You have somebody from the executive team. It's not for everyone, but it's an opportunity to get some unique feedback. And especially in the context of unionization, where there may be some conflict. If you're in a situation where you are looking at an organizing effort, there more than likely is probably some conflict between your entry-level positions and your supervisors. And this is a good way to get some feedback. Now, I can tell you, you have to be careful not to let it turn into a witch hunt, but it does have value. If you want more information on this, if you're not doing any of these things, even if you want to introduce doing online surveys to your environment, reach out to AMT. We can facilitate this kind of effort. We do have some of the tools that are available to do this. So if you have any questions about this, reach out to Jeff Dubrava, our business development director, and he can give you some more information on this. These things do have a lot of value. Any questions on surveys or meetings or measuring employee attitudes? You are a very quiet group today. It must be Friday the 13th. Handbooks. Let's talk about handbooks real quick. There's a lot of type on this page, but basically what it says is make sure you have the proper handbooks for your population. If you have a CBA, make sure that the things that are not covered in the CBA you have covered in another handbook or another document. For those of you that have experience with CBAs, you know that the CBA usually only covers those things that are covered by the defined work relation rules around wages, benefits, working hours, and that kind of thing. And it could leave a lot of wiggle room for things that are not covered in the CBA. If you have any questions about this, I would encourage you to reach out to the New York Department of Labor. They do have no-cost solutions and consulting that's available to you to help write employee handbooks. Now, they probably won't give you a lot of help when it comes to creating a CBA that's outside their scope, but handbook, and don't forget about your third-party vendors. They can offer some help when it comes to creating handbooks also. If you have ADP or SuccessFactors, a lot of your HRIS companies and a lot of your payroll companies will help you develop handbooks and employee books for no-cost policy handbooks, and they will review them. They have access to legal review. I know this is something that ADP offers, depending on the suite that you have. Employment contracts, really quickly. Employment at will. I think most of you are familiar with this concept where it says employers have the right at any time to terminate, move, basically move people around at will. And the same goes for your employees. They have the right to quit at any time with or without notice for any reason, without prior notice. But do be aware that this has legal protections for both sides. So it's not the free-for-all that the language might suggest. Employees and employers both have protections for employment at will. And then there are a couple other examples of employment contracts. There's a non-disclosure agreement where people agree not to discuss the knowledge they gained with your organization. And then there's non-competes, which keeps people from leaving to work for one of your competitors. It's good to have these in place. It's difficult to enforce them sometimes, but it is good to have them part of the culture so people have an understanding of what their obligations are to your organization during their tenure and after. Any questions about employment contracts? All right, we're flying right through this. Now we're going to get into some really fun stuff about workplace conflict, and I'm not implying that workplace conflict is fun, but it can be challenging, and it can raise the temperature in your organization based on the nature. And it's always good to have a plan. It's always good to have a strategy about how to deal with workplace conflict. We're going to talk about investigations. We're going to talk about local trusted representatives. This is something that we discussed a little bit when we talked about employee retention and engagement. And then a third party. So whenever you're doing your investigations, if you have a situation where you have some kind of workplace conflict, whether it be something small like a difference of opinion, or something big like a charge of harassment or hostile work environment, do your investigation. You have a plan for doing an investigation. Have a form. For those of you that are not SHRM members, I'm not promoting SHRM, but they do have some great forms for doing investigations based on what the allegations are. Some great checklists. And if you don't have access to SHRM, you can always reach out to AMT. We can help you with that kind of thing. Don't go it alone. Make sure you enroll your local trusted representative and have a third party present when you're doing investigations. I would recommend for anybody on this call that has HR responsibilities, don't go into a room behind closed doors with somebody of the opposite sex to do an investigation. That can go sideways in so many different ways. And even if you're not doing an investigation, be wary of one-on-one investigations and conversations where there's an opportunity for the temperature to get raised and there to be accusations. So I would recommend always having a third person in the room. If you have a small HR department and you're only one person, take somebody from management with you. Make sure it's a supervisor or a manager or someone from your department. Keep the process confidential and private. Don't share more than you have to. A lot of the willingness for people in your organization to bring these things forward and to talk openly about them is the knowledge of the professionals handling this are not going to share my information beyond who has to know. And a lot of these things can be kept completely confidential, unless, of course, if a line has been crossed with where a law has been broken, and then it's hard to maintain confidentiality after that. And then lower the temperature if you have workplace conflict. Get back to normal, whatever normal is. Get back to normal as fast as you can. If that means sending someone home with pay, then by all means do that. I don't know if any of you have any experience where you've had an argument or something that's come close to fisticuffs, where people are just genuinely angry at each other for whatever reason. It's hard to do an investigation in that environment, especially when you still have people that are still angry. They're walking around in your work environment, whether it be the office or the production floor. They're talking to people about what happened. They're trying to build consensus. They're trying to build a team, especially the person that's in the wrong or someone that thinks they're in the wrong. You might see them working very hard to sway people to be witnesses for their side of whatever happened. So don't be afraid to lower the temperature. Like I said, if you have two people that are really at it, send them both home. Say, pending investigation, you're suspended with pay. Stay close to your phone. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Now, if you have a union environment, of course, you're going to have to reach out to the union and make sure that this is, you're going to want to talk to your business agent. Anybody have any experience with this? Anybody in their day-to-day dealings with workplace conflict, have you ever had to send somebody home to chill things enough to do an investigation?
We have here at Raymond Hadley, we had a couple of situations where an employee would get irate. We had one, it was like I think it was my second year here. The CEO was actually involved, and the employee got in my CEO's face, and it was really, really rough. And so we ended up sending the person home without pay initially. We did end up paying him once the investigation was completed, and we terminated the employee.
Did the situation wind up resulting in corrective action for the employee that was involved?
He got terminated in the end, based on multiple reasons. That just happened to be the one that basically, for lack of better terms, kicked the bucket over. But
Right.
other than that, he had prior engagements that weren't necessarily the best or most respectful.
And that's a good, I'm glad you brought up that point, Carrie, but that's something we're going to talk about in a little bit is whenever you have these situations, go back and look at the history. And it sounds like this person had a little bit of a history. And that's a perfect example. Thank you, Carrie. Anyone else have any experience with situations where it was just too hot to handle at the time and you had to send someone home? Well, I will say we have a group of very lucky people. I've had to do this more than I would like to count. And it is especially difficult if you get into a situation like sexual harassment, where you really don't know what you're dealing with when it first erupts, and you're starting your investigation. So, like I said, this is something that can be very challenging, because when you're in these situations, like Carrie was talking about, you have someone that's in someone's face. You're always running the risk of someone throwing a punch. And we all know in the world we live in, especially in the country where we live, where there's access to firearms. I know we hate to think that this would never happen, but people leave confrontations in the workplace, go out to their car and get a gun and come back. And if you're in HR, you know this is kind of in the back of your mind at all times, because unfortunately HR people get the first bullet. And I'm not trying to scare anyone, but this is something you have to think about when it comes to workplace security. You want to always make sure that your doors are locked, and you're prepared for the worst. When you start thinking about it won't happen here, or it can't happen here, that's a dangerous place to go. So always be watching your back when it comes to workplace conflict. Any other questions, comments? Thank you for your feedback, Carrie. Anything anyone has to add about workplace conflict?
Hi, Wayne.
Yeah,
It's Maria.
Yeah.
In the previous job, we had a conflict with workplace violence and sexual harassment. And it turned out to be a nightmare.
And so it came out of the same situation that you had violence and sexual harassment out of the same investigation?
It did, because I was working for a not-for-profit and dealing with mostly attorneys. And the one attorney who filed the initial sexual harassment claim, which was not about her, she said she saw the ED sexually harassing the secretary, who had no clue about the whole situation. And she felt that I wasn't doing enough, so she punched me in the arm.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then she said, oh, I was just kidding. And, it just turned into a complete nightmare. We had to hire a third party to come in, another attorney, to come in and talk to everyone. The investigation actually went on for several years, because the associate ED is the one who filed the claim. She ended up filing a sexual harassment retaliation claim.
Holy moly.
Oh, it was horrible. And I left in 2005, but they fired the ED, and they fired a few people because of it, even though it was never proven. They just fired the ED because they felt that the way that he handled the associate ED and the whole situation, it wasn't handled properly from the beginning. So they let him go. And then eventually we had an interim director, and he happened to be good friends with this associate director. So it just turned into a huge mess. I left in 2005. And to my knowledge, it was still being investigated up to about 2010.
Wow. Well, that's crazy. I have to give you, if there's an award for the craziest investigation, I think you would probably get it, because I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I've never had one that was that convoluted. You know, most of us have had sexual harassment or somebody taking a punch at someone or
Mhm.
something like that, but I've never had them combined. And Maria, you make a really good point that this can drag on forever. So when you talk about the impact to an organization, if you have a situation like this that grows legs like this one did,
Mhm.
this is going to cost a ton of money when it comes to legal fees.
Oh, it was
And
terrible.
go ahead, Maria.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't interrupt you, but we were completely divided at that point. It was an organization with 5 regional offices, and this one person was trying to pit the offices against us. And so the office that I worked at in Ithaca, I don't want to give too much away here, but
Yeah.
that particular office, there's I think about 15 of us, and we were completely divided. And so we stayed in our offices. We were afraid to do anything, to say anything. The controller, you know, he and I, we would just like go for walks and talk about it. And, you know, we had to really temper what we said to anyone, because anything could have been taken as retaliation.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I thank you, Maria, for sharing that, because it makes a lot of points. You know, doing a good job investigating things and making sure that you have the employee and labor relations environment where these things don't happen. But if you have something like this that blows up on you, it can drag an organization down to the point it can't recover. There are instances where a lack of proper investigations and cultures that go unchecked, the legal fees can crush an environment, and it can make it difficult to do business. So that's a great example, Maria. I will follow up with you. I will want to hear more about this, because I'm fascinated by what you know about this, and without sharing too much, like you said. So that's a couple of really good examples of workplace conflict. So let's move on and talk about the path to resolution. If you're doing the investigation, your number one skill, especially in investigations, is going to be listening. Managing emotions is going to be very hard. Most of you are aware of a concept called emotional quotient, EQ, where having a high emotional quotient means being able to manage your emotions while managing the emotions of others. And this is one of the things that makes this kind of thing very, very difficult. It's hard to do an investigation and get to the facts when people are angry, are emotional in any way. They're crying, they're disengaged. It's really hard to do. So managing emotions is a big piece of this puzzle. Agreeing on goals, understanding what the resolution is going to be, focusing on the issues and facts rather than the personalities, considering all perspectives, get all of the facts, take some extra time and talk to everyone that had something to do or witness the situation. Don't leave anyone out, because believe it or not, after a few hours, perspectives on what really happened can change. Engage in problem solving, exploring alternative solutions. If you're in a union environment, you want to make sure that those are non-precedent setting. And we can talk more about that if you want. And then adopt a policy prohibiting retaliation, which is what Maria just discussed, which is exactly what you don't want to happen when you have one of these situations, that someone's trying to do the right thing, try and find a resolution, and now they feel like they're being retaliated against, which opens a whole new can of worms. So that was a great example. You hit almost all of the points here, Maria, and I just want everybody to know I didn't pay her for that feedback. Disciplinary actions. Produce persuasive evidence of the employee's culpability or negligence. Give the employee a fair chance to give their side of the story. Every story has at least 3 sides at a minimum, and hopefully one of those will be the truth if you dig far enough. Determine a penalty appropriate for the offense. Don't make an example of someone just to prove a point. Impose discipline that is consistent. And then one thing to consider for those of you that don't have it, and I'm assuming that most of you do, but constructive discipline process, which is another name for a step system where there is progressive discipline. is probably the best way to go. And the reason why I say that, it's the most defensible way of implementing corrective actions or disciplinary actions. It's the most defensible in court. If you can show that you gave someone a verbal warning, then a written warning, then a final warning, or maybe a suspension on top of that, and a final warning with that, that's usually the best way to show that, hey, we tried to deter this behavior. And then in red, have a goal. As HR professionals, when you're going through this process, think to yourself, is this disciplinary action that I'm issuing, is it going to work? Is this going to fix the problem? And the problem, our goal is not giving a disciplinary action or corrective action. Our goal is to make sure this doesn't happen again. So think about your process and say to yourself, will this keep this from happening again? And if you're saying no, then explore something else. It may be a point, if you have someone that has anger issues and you've written them up a couple of times, it may be an opportunity to do a mandatory referral to a counselor. For those of you that have EAPs, employee assistance programs, talk to your counselors at those EAPs and come up with a way that you can do mandatory referrals. Like I said, the goal is to eliminate recurrences of the unacceptable behavior. Any questions about disciplinary actions? And I know we're going at a very high level. If any of you want to stay after this to discuss any part of this, we can, obviously. Terminations. We never want to get to this point. I know for HR people, this is what keeps us awake at night. And over the years, I've tried to convince myself, I don't fire people, they fire themselves. But it's still tough to let someone go knowing that they have to go home and tell their family, their kids and their spouse, I no longer have a job. That's tough on every level. It's tough for you, it's tough for them, it's tough for their family. So some guidelines to follow when it comes to doing terminations. Never terminate on the spot. Suspend the subject to discharge pending further investigation. And we've talked about lowering the temperature around that. Conduct employee interviews is something we've talked about, and don't delay. If you're busy, heaven forbid you got other things going on, drop everything else. Get to this first, because delaying can only make it worse. Focus on the basis of the discharge and not any of the peripheral stuff. Inform the employee in person of the decision to terminate and the reason if you can. Now, I will make an exception to that. If you feel like there's possible violent reaction or things could go sideways by doing that, then by all means do it over the phone, but don't do it through a text or an email. Or the U.S. mail, registered certified mail is another way to address this. Be alert to possible reactions. Maria was talking about she got punched. I've never been punched. But I have been threatened. I had a situation once where a person walked back into the building. It's still unknown whether that person was armed, but be aware, understand. And one thing to do, and this is one of my best practices, is when you terminate someone, you walk them to the door, you watch them get in their car, and you watch them leave the property. And make sure that they're off the property. Make sure that they understand that coming back on company property is not acceptable, and you will notify law enforcement if you need to. And then send an email to your managers and the rest of the organization, or talk to them as soon as you can and say, this person has been terminated. They are no longer welcome on company property. If you see them, please notify your manager immediately or someone in HR. Don't take chances. Like I said, we all think that we can't have an active shooter situation in our facility, but it's unfortunately it's possible. And then this is a great point. When I was going through this this presentation with Jeff DeBravo yesterday, he brought this up about being effective, efficient, and prepared for termination. When you terminate someone, have all of your paperwork ready. Have all your unemployment paperwork ready. Have everything for them that they need to go home and file for unemployment, and they know what their next steps are. You don't send them home with an empty bucket for them to stew and fume about and become more distressed. So make terminations as effective and efficient as you do hirings. Be ready for it and have your documentation ready. Any questions about the termination process? Any comments? All right, so we have about 10 minutes to go. And I knew we would be short on time. That's why I left unions at the end of this. It sounds like most people on the call are union free. So I'm going to go through some of this just so you understand what unionization is like and some of the reasons why, if you are union free, you want to stay union free. But if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to jump in, but I'm not going to spend as much time on it as I usually would. So for unions, the good thing to understand is the level at which bargaining occurs, the focus of bargaining topics, the density at which the percentage of workers belong to a union. And even for those of you here that are non-union, when you come up with your union-free strategy, understand who in your organization would be eligible to be members of the union and who would not. Most often a union will target your entry-level workforce, your hourly workforce, but it is possible for your support staff, scientists, engineers, and supervisors can be union members also. So have a good idea about the demographics and the function within your organization. Membership, I'm not going to touch on a lot. And then relationship with management. If most of you know that there are good relationships with unions and bad ones, or stormy ones. I don't want to use the word bad because there's usually enough blame to go around. Labor relations strategies when it comes to unions, there can be an acceptance strategy where management feels that the union presence is a benefit. So there can be an acceptance. There's also an avoidance strategy where you can look to decertify a union. It's tough, but it can be done. And then most often there's an adaptation strategy where you try to use the best of both worlds to make the relationship work for you. Grievance, do's and don'ts. Now, grievance is a word that's used in a union environment, but it can go for just general conflict resolution. So for those of you that don't have unions, don't look at this as a black or white grievance process, but you can use these tools just in general conflict resolution. So do your investigations. Visit the work area where there was where the complaint came from. Understand the area that you're talking about. Determine if there were witnesses. Examine the employee personnel file. Examine prior records. Maria had talked about that, or I believe it was Carrie said something about that. That the conflict they had, they looked back at the person's record and they had a long history, which can that can give you some insights about what the future holds. Treat everyone with respect, treat them as your equal, hold your grievance discussions privately, as we said with conflict resolution. Keep it as private as possible. Inform your supervisors of what's going on. Don't leave your supervisors in the dark, union or non-union. They need to know why people are behaving the way they are. If you have an investigation going between two people, there's probably going to be a difference in behavior. The way those people deal with each other and their friends or their acquaintances at work. Let your supervisors know, let them be in the know so they know what's going on so they can head things off. It really helps with retaliation processes also. As we discussed, have at least 2 management representatives present. If you're doing the investigation, your HR, have someone else in the room, and then document everything. Take as many notes as you can. I know when you're in these investigation meetings and you're trying to manage the emotions of people involved, they're upset, they're angry. Your notes are going to be the only thing that you can fall back on to accurately move forward in your investigation. Don'ts, and I think I spelled don'ts correctly. Don't hold back the remedy if the employer is wrong. So if the company representative, the supervisor, the manager, or even HR, if we've done something wrong, own it, document it, fix it, and move on. That builds trust. Being able to accept mistakes from a company perspective, it will increase your, it will better your relationship with your employees. Don't admit the binding effect of past practice. Don't let exceptions to your normal work environment become precedent setting. Let me see if there's anything else in here that has value. Don't give long written grievance answers. And this applies to non-union environments also. If someone has made a complaint and there's no complaint to be made, there's no rule that's been violated, don't write a book or a couple paragraphs in response. Just simply respond to the person and say, your claim has no merit. This is the policy that applies. The policy wasn't violated. Let's talk about it. The rest is pre-union specific, so I will skip it. Wine garden rights, I'm not going to touch on. This is for those of you that have union environments and around. This goes for someone saying they want a representative for a union. We're not going to touch on that. And I'm not going to touch on HR's role in collective bargaining. For those of you that, if you have interest in this, if any of this applies, let us know, and we can definitely have a conversation at another time. And then with 4 minutes to go, I do want to let you know that the next meeting that we have will be on June the 10th at 11 a.m. And we will talk about safety and risk management. And this is another one of those big ones that, there's a lot of compliance matters that are included in the next topic. So hopefully we'll see all of you then. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Jeff Dubrava. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing